with that, we have made it to the final portion of the day. I have in front of me the cards that were submitted for questions, and so we're going to go through these first. I'm going to kind of be stationary here reading the questions, and then we've got a couple of microphone runners running around. So if you want to answer the question, raise your hand, it'll be brought to you, and then if you have a kind of a second question with that, please, get the mic to you. Does anybody have a card filled out that needs to get it sent up to me? Okay, cool. Our first question is, they would like further clarification on Kendall's question about burn boss and liability. Does anybody remember that topic and want to speak on that?
That was Kendall's question. He wants me to read it further.
Oh, you named it for you. Sorry. Yes.
Pete told me to put it down on the card.
Pete, I feel like you're loading the deck. Do we have a mic? I guess you can use this one.
Test.
Excellent.
Repeat it again for me.
The question is about burn boss and their liabilities.
All right, so that gets to be a big question. You hear a lot of stuff, people talking about, the landowner has to light the match, doing that. And doing this because it's their fire, because everybody's scared whoever lights the match is going to be responsible. Wrong. Whoever receives the benefit of the action is the one responsible for it. So again, it's just like in everything else. So in a job, so NRCS, how many NRCS employees I got in here? Job approval authority states in there that as long as you're doing what you're supposed to within your job, you accept no greater risk than anything else that you're doing. And so that's the same thing with anything, whether you're a paid employee of somebody or not, even a volunteer. If you're acting under the scope or the supervision of somebody else, it's still their fire. So if I'm going to Pete's place and we're going to do a burn, and Pete says, John, light the fire, let's go and do that, and I'll get my lighter out, strike it up, and start lighting it. Whose fire is it? It's Pete's. I'm acting under his scope and his responsibility. I'm just like, even though I'm not getting paid, I'm just like any hired employee or volunteer, I'm acting under his authority to do that. And so that's whose authority the fire is. It's just like if you hired a contractor to do the burning for you, you are still liable for that contractor because you are still the one receiving the benefit of the action. It's just like if you hired a painter to paint your house and you live next door to somebody and the wind blew and got paint all over their car. Yeah, they're going to be mad at the contractor that did that, but guess who's going to ultimately have to pay for it if it really does anything? Whoever deemed receiving the benefit of the action on that. So Pete, we can go to a burn and Pete can say, John, would you lead this burn for me? Because I don't feel comfortable doing it. I don't have the experience. Is it my burn? I'm in charge of the burn at that moment, but it's still Pete's burn. Because he is the one receiving the benefit of the action and I'm doing it for what he says. Now, if we go to that same burn and Pete goes, John, I don't feel comfortable burning today. I don't think the conditions are right. I'm just not comfortable with it. And I said, Pete, go ahead. We'll just go ahead and do it. And he said, no, I don't think so. And I said, yeah, Pete, we'll be all right. And then I take off and start lighting. Then what just happened? I acted outside of my scope, outside of what he wanted me to do. And then, yes, it became my fire because I did what I wasn't supposed to do. Everybody good and confused now?
Thanks for that example. So John reminded me of a phrase earlier today, due diligence. So I think it's good to ensure that this gets completed. So I asked John to do the fire because I think John knows more and it will do it more successfully, right? John just said very clearly that even though he was hired or I brought him in, if we have a problem on that fire, it's still my fire. What I think is important to recognize, though, in that is that if I have to explain my actions on that fire, I did due diligence. I recognized that I didn't have the skills to be able to pull this off anyway, and I did due diligence, and I brought in a better professional. And that's a defensible place in a burn plan when you recognize, I'm not going to get into complexity ratings, but let's just use the word complexity kind of in a broad scope, that when you recognize where your limits are and you bring in additional help, that shows due diligence, and that's a smart move. So for that landowner bringing in the volunteer fire department, that is a very defensible due diligence move if you've got a fire that you think is maybe that you can't handle on your own. So, awesome.
We do have quite a few questions, so I'm going to move on to the next one, and if you want me to stay somewhere, holler and we can go back. The next two I'm going to kind of pair together. I'm going to read them both and then we can see what we get for answers. All this talk about cost share, what does it cost to burn? Talk about the costs. And then I think it makes sense to pair it with, there have been multiple mentions of EQIP cost share rates, but what does that actually mean in dollars? So could we talk about the cost to burn, which we might have learned a little bit since that was written, but also what does EQIP cost sharing look like?
I can talk a little bit about EQIP rates. They change from year to year. The current rates are just out in draft at the current time. I'm going to need somebody to talk regarding the cost of a burn, and I will go quickly look up the payment rate that we have for the current year.
Cost of a burn is, you got something, John, that can help that? You got a mic over there?
Yeah, sorry. There is more interest in cost of burning. There's a fact sheet here on the Great Plains Fire Science table on that. We did a survey 2 years ago looking at the cost of burning, and we published all the stuff this last year on that. And it was a survey throughout the Great Plains. We tried to get people to do that. And so what we come up with was $11.37 was the cost. The biggest cost is preparation of fire breaks is going to be your biggest cost. Within that, and then labor, fire break construction was the highest, and talking about fuel, food to help pay your crew, and some other costs. But the deal is, what we found out from this survey that we did on the cost, that if you were a member of a burn association, that cost went from $11.37 to $5.50 an acre. So the benefit of being a PBA member is doing that. So there's much more copies of this over here on the table for the Joint Fire Science, or the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange.
Thank you for having a number to put on that. I think kind of the nebulous idea can be a little daunting sometimes. Thank you, John.
He had a question. The question was, did it matter on size of burn? And that was, the average size on this burn was 237 acres, but from what we figured out, it worked all the way, the cost worked up to about, I think, 3,000 acres in size. That was kind of similar. But there's a diminishing cost of scale. So the larger you get, the cost is going to diminish relative to that. Because again, you think about it, if you got a quarter section, think of a square quarter section, that's 2 miles of fire break you got to put around it. But if you take a full section, that's only 4 miles. So you're only adding 50% more of fire break, but you're burning 3 times more area. So that'll reduce your cost a lot more.
And
Fuel types was all grasslands, mainly grassland fuels.
And from an EQIP payment rate for fiscal 25 in South Dakota, we're going to pay somewhere between $12 and $20 an acre for the prescribed burn. There again, if you did some fire breaks, there'd be some, minor or small amounts that we could pay for that practice. But the prescribed burning practice it depends on your landscape and terrain. But the payment's going to be somewhere between the $12 and $20.
I'm sure people are going to be curious about, there is a brush management payment. Like, yes, they're going to burn, but they're also going to be cutting and stuff in and different things like that. And so there are also other things that through EQIP that they'll get. I just wanted to clarify for people who are curious about this, that they're not just going to get $12 to $20 an acre for the burn for everything for cutting and for cut and stuff or other burn breaks. They'd be getting an extra payment for those other practices as well, correct?
Yes, they would. If they could do brush management alone, they wouldn't have to necessarily burn. But if they did both in conjunction, that they would get paid for that brush management as well. I was gonna look the payment up for brush management. And the mechanical approach to that is their payments vary a lot based on your approach to the brush management, and that's going to be something you need to. It's going to be based on your landscape. It's going to be based on how you do it. You know, if like a mechanical control with a low infestation, you've got a few species out there that you're going to go out and cut. You know, that is a $57 per acre rate, but the rates go up quite a bit from there. You know, a hand application going out with a chainsaw, manual control, that's $56. If you're doing less than an acre, it's $387. So there's a lot of different payment scenarios, we call them, that apply to brush management, and the payments vary because the requirement to complete the brush control is far different. So those particular scenarios, you're gonna need to go and visit with your NRCS staff. They're gonna have to come out and do the field survey, inventory of what you're working with, and then match your needs to our payment scenarios the best. So I wish I could provide a really direct, easy number that you could write down, take home, and know that's what you expect, but that's not available today. It's based on your site conditions.
I don't mean to overstep, but does it sound like, based on the number that John provided and the numbers that you provided, there's a good chance that if you qualify and get EQIP, you probably will not be out a considerable financial burden to burn your property correctly? Is that the gist?
Yeah.
Okay.
I really think that if you can apply for EQIP and be selected for funding, that there's going to be an investment, but it's not going to be the majority. Or our target payment rates are about 50% of the project cost, but they're calculated at a larger basis. So I don't believe that they're going to be very disappointed. I mean, if you kind of expect a 50% payment rate, that's where our target payment is. But our EQIP funding is not guaranteed. You know, we receive a lot of applications each year that we evaluate, and we rank those applications and fund as far as our allocation allows. So not everybody gets funded. So that's something if a producer wishes to compete for, there may be some time investment involved with that application.
Thank you.
Kara, real quick, just to piggyback on that, and what you just said there, just a slight correction on some of that. There still is a pretty considerable cost. Probably one of the biggest obstacles I run into when working with Mid-Missouri and working with landowners to start doing prescribed burning is deferment. Finding a place for ranchers to take cattle, to build that deferment, to build those fuels for prescribed burning. NRCS is now starting to offer some cost share funds for deferment, but like it's been mentioned earlier today, that still doesn't solve the problem of where you can take your cattle to. That's an on-the-ground problem that it's costly. So I just wanted to put that out there, just add to that.
I am naive. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I guess what I'd like to add to what both of you, there is a payment for fire break establishment too. So it might be a combination of brush management and along the edges, and then where brush management is not needed, you can just do a fire break, okay? And along with the deferment, and I think Val touched on that earlier, but look at your cropland, because there might be an opportunity there for an annual forage crop, or multiple ones to feed your animals on that annual forage crop while you rest that paddock in preparation for the fire.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Is there a central location to find fire districts, contacts, and county dispatches?
No, there's not.
Excellent. Is there interest in starting a prescribed fire council in South Dakota, and what would be the pros and cons of that?
I kind of talked about this a little earlier, and the question came in. I'm one that kind of looks at pros and cons of that. I've not ever really been super convinced that it would be good, because I've felt probably that it would have been dominated by the agencies. Not, and I say that with an appropriate amount of love, but I'm just saying that, you know, like when you have the agency model, it doesn't apply to the needs of the landowners per se. Brian talked about kind of a hybrid model. There's in Nebraska, theirs is a landowner board. I think it can kind of be both and, but I do like the idea that the agencies themselves don't run the prescribed fire council. And I guess, you know, we've had this model right underneath our noses that we haven't really thought about. Look at how the Grassland Coalition is run. A board of advisors, but landowner, producer led. South Dakota Soil Health Coalition, a board of landowners, and with advisors of the agencies. Maybe that's the model. That's my thoughts. I'm not sure. Did I say something wrong, Emily? I didn't know. Thank you. Emily would like to share her thoughts now.
Thank you, Pete. Could we develop a South Dakota specific training course for landowners and resources to work on prescription fire in the state?
I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer this, but I, as a landowner, and knowing what I went through, my answer would be is I think we have it, but maybe I'm wrong.
If using NRCS/Pheasants Forever programs for pre-burn prep, what are obligations/penalties if burn never happens?
We covered that. That was
Okay.
my question. I think we covered that pretty well.
If SDSU loses its training ground, how will that affect the state-owned land along the Missouri River?
My best answer to that right now is no comment.
Someone should have screened these before they got handed to me. Insurance rates have escalated dramatically due to climate change. Fire exposure is a determining factor in cost. I understand that the rating can be lowered, therefore the cost, but can someone speak on this as it affects us all? This is based on the likelihood over 30 years of fire damage, and has anyone had luck in negotiating lower rates for homeowner insurance, I think, once area has been burned and cedar has been eradicated? So has anybody had luck lowering high-risk home insurance prices due to wildfire once cedar has been removed?
I had a chance to speak directly with the person that asked this question. So I was anticipating a question on, am I insured if I conduct a prescribed fire on my property? I was floored by the heart of this question that says, my assessor came out and I have to pay more insurance because I now am in a higher fire risk area. We're there now, folks. I mean, like that's reality. Like that floored me today. I did not anticipate that question. So I'm going to look at John and Brian, and if we have anybody that can speak very knowledgeably to this, but what's going on south of us? Are you guys seeing insurance rates in newly forested areas increase because of fire defensibility and fire defensibility, I guess, on homes?
We're not seeing anything in Oklahoma yet within that. I haven't, you see more like in California that they've lost some insurance. Part of it is because California is just not friendly to insurance whatsoever. And so all these insurance companies are pulling out. A few years back, going back to the total question about insurance rates and dropping things down and doing that, there was one insurance company about 10 years ago that provided insurance, and they said in the fire-prone areas of California, Utah, Arizona, and Nevada, any of their insured people, they had 6 months. They were going to they would do a examination of their property, and if it was deemed to needed some kind of work to make it more fire safe or tolerant, they would have an X amount of time to do that, or they would drop them from their insurance. That never did come around because they were going to lose too many people doing that. Other things I've been told is insurance is based on national stuff, and nationally we don't lose enough houses and stuff on a nationwide level to give anybody any kind of rate cuts, is what I've been told, because it's just not worth it until that high. It's kind of like you see now, like in Florida, along the Gulf Coast, hurricane codes that are being enforced. You got to build specifically to that kind of code. That's all insurance driven. And if you don't do that, then you don't get insurance or doing whatever. And so there's just not enough loss. Because remember, insurance companies have two main goals, and that's to collect a premium and pay out as little as possible. I mean, that's the business model. And so if it's not going to benefit them, it's nothing to worry about.
I would also say from an insurance standpoint, like if you look at the research that's done, Victoria Donovan, the rate and instance of larger wildfires in the Great Plains has been increasing. So I think that insurance companies are probably going to be taking a look at that, in the future if we start having even more fires. But I mean, our insurance rates are already going up, I think outside of it, but I've never heard of any insurance companies say we're going to lower your rate because you're using prescribed fire.
I should have put these into fun categories. This will be a plant biology question. Taller cedars will not burn or are harder to burn. Could you explain a little as to why they are harder to burn?
From the Oklahoma perspective? No. From where he is, the deal on cedars is there's two things. The number one reason why some cedars burn and some don't, it's all about fuel moisture. It's about how much leaf moisture is in that plant. It's all about water. So that's why you see some trees that go up in flames and others that won't burn. They just brown out or doing that. It's about leaf moisture. It's how dry that plant actually is. And so that, secondly, that's where, again, we've been seeing more impact on cedars with growing season burns, and that's due to ambient air temperature. So burning when the conditions are hotter outside. So if you think about it, the thermal death temperature of most living plants is about 150 degrees. Kind of depends on how much moisture is in that living plant tissue. But all you got to do is raise the temperature over 150 degrees and it'll break cell walls and start doing that. So you think about it, if you burn in the spring or winter months, what's it going to be? What's the outside air temperature going to be? It's going to be, let's say it's 50 degrees when you burn. So that means you got to raise the temperature of that plant 100 degrees. So how are you going to get that done? And plus also, what was the temperature overnight? What's the core temperature of that plant and doing that? Whereas what we've seen, like in Oklahoma, we'll burn in the summer and it's 100 degrees outside when we're burning. So all we got to do is raise the temperature 50. And so we can do that with a real slow moving, not very intense fire because we don't have to have a lot of heat. So it's about moisture content and it's about intensity on doing that. Cedars, I tell people all the time, cedars make great fire breaks. I'll slam a fire into a solid stand of cedars probably 95% of the time. The 5% that they're dry, I won't, because they're going to burn. But doing it, because it's all about fuel moisture on that.
All right. Will any of the conservation partners here finance/assist to use goats for targeted brush management? Emily's shrugging for those of you who can't see her. That sounds like a no. No.
Just FYI, the Prairie Project has been doing a lot of research in this area, so they might be a good some good people to reach out to talk about it, because I know they have test plots and landowners and ranchers that are kind of working through that issue with goats. But it's been a struggle from, I don't know, in most, like in Nebraska at least. So
Excellent. Thank you. This one is, oh, sorry, Emily.
That's all right. So we could potentially provide financial assistance for that type of treatment. We would probably just have to be, what's the word? Loose in our terminology. But we could probably do it under prescribed grazing, which is, there's a couple of different scenarios under prescribed grazing. There used to be a specific scenario under brush management, but then nationally they didn't like it, so they took it away. So,
Herbaceous weed control.
yeah, we do have biological control under herbaceous weed control, but that's only for weeds, for non-woody species. So maybe in the future we'll work on that. I'll put it on my to-do list.
Thank you, Emily. Sorry about that. I have a question. It says neighbors burning and then lists fuel, fence, and liability separately. So any specific answers or ideas on how to answer that?
Yeah, that was an anonymous question, so I'll take that. So the question was, my neighbor lit their pasture on fire with a very low fuel load with what you would perceive as the correct wind direction. That fire didn't go where it was supposed to because there was no fuel, and it backburned onto my property, burning a fence and burning, dozens of acres of grass. And then it went across my property and potentially was going to get on another property. So the question was, what is that person's liability to me? Because their fire, they had the right to light, but had no business lighting, you might say, no plan, no training, no understanding of fire, did some low-level maybe destruction on mine. But I thought the more interesting question was then if it goes across mine and goes on to somebody else, am I liable? So my answer was no. You are not the one that lit that fire. You are a victim of that fire, just like the person that it will ultimately end up on. I did ask a few more questions. I said, what do you intend to do about it? And of course, neighbor relations come in and maybe nothing. So then the question back to me was, well, what could we do about it? And, the best thing to do is try to encourage that person to never do that again until they challenge themselves to maybe get a little bit of education and training on that clearly there's no understanding of fire there whatsoever by the person that dropped the match. They thought that you could just throw gas on a cedar tree and expect them all to burn, and so there's very, very limited knowledge of the fuel or the objective of what they were trying to accomplish. So I think I did that justice. The person wanted to remain anonymous. Anybody hear anything I said in that answer that is inaccurate, especially on the liability side? Brian?
no, I was gonna, it's related but unrelated, but I was talking to somebody the other day and they were talking about how even just on one, like it was a PBA burn and it got away from, they had a small escape. It was like less than 20 acres, but it burned up the neighbor's fence. And they went to the neighbor, and the next day there was about 30 guys out there replacing the fence for the guy. And so I guess just from a liability and neighborly standpoint, if that stuff like that happens, those neighborly relations and in that village, that community that you build, get together and just take care of the problem before it ever escalates any further. And I realize this is different than your liability question, but I can't imagine that anybody would be liable for a fire they didn't have any part of and just cross their land.
Landowner, cover burning, 100% safety, or 50% birds.
Oh, that was me again. Sorry. Okay, so that was that was a comment that I scratched down when Joe Blastic was giving his presentation as just a note. So ecology is super important. We all know what our objectives should be and are. And on the professional side, whether it's game fishing parks, in particular the Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, and et cetera, Fish and Wildlife. Joe made a comment that we never burn more than 50% because we want that residual ecological cover for those species that we're trying to actually enhance the habitat for. I made a note, though, that, and I talked to Joe and Owen about this, and I think we're all in agreement on this. When it comes to landowners, keep it safe, keep it simple, use your natural and man-made fire breaks first. You know, don't go try to split a grassland. If your objective is the whole, and you can do the whole safer by using brakes. I think of what we did at Lower Brule, right? Made the unit, just make that unit as big as you can to hit a controllable line and start that way. Bigger is easier, and that was my point. When we want to challenge ourselves to ecological objectives, sure. And when you have the tools and resources to be able to split a grassland, great. But don't start there if you're not, you know, make it simple. Be successful first, I guess was my point. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to convey here? Not everybody has to have the ecological objective as their primary if, in fact, you're trying to kill trees or something like that. Make sense? So we need, as professionals, we need to recognize that and help them. When a producer comes into our offices and says, this is my target, this is what I want to burn, we need to look at that with discerning eyes and say, can we make this easier, even if easier is bigger?
I think you also wrote this next one. So, what does the governor's decision to limit UFOs?
VFDs.
VFD. Option issue permits.
In Nebraska, Brian, that was to you. Like you had mentioned your governor a few years back said VFDs can't issue permits. What drove that when you had such a fire culture being that you guys were building?
Yeah, so what happened essentially was we had a really bad wildfire year and drought conditions and stuff like that. So there was a lot of wildfires, and our previous governor was thinking about doing it. Like from what I understand, he was considering it and then decided against it just because if he thought he'd get pushback. And the new governor ended up actually implementing it. And from what I understand from talking with people, that there was quite a bit of pushback, and it was lifted pretty immediately after conditions somewhat improved. You know, because I guess in the state, like for context, in the state of Nebraska, we have to get a burn permit from the local volunteer fire department district. And that's where the authority for implementing burns lies in the state. And there's no statute. The statute does not say the issue lies within the governorship. And so a lot of VFDs are part of our burn associations. A lot of members on our volunteer fire departments are members of prescribed burn associations. And a lot of them are ranchers, and so they understand the impacts of not being able to burn. So I think that there was that culture that I kind of developed with more and more fire happening. There was definitely more pushback from the community with the increase in the fire culture to do that. So.
Thank you. And the last card that I have is more of a comment or suggestion. It says, don't forget that some UFDs can or will supply manpower or equipment for free or for donation. So something to keep in mind when moving forward.
Can I add a comment to that?
Absolutely.
Any fire that you ever plan on doing, whether you need the volunteer fire department to come or show up or want them to, just invite them. I can tell you I've been on the VFD for 11 years, and we have new members that come in, and the first time they ever see a fire is on a wildfire, and they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. So from a training perspective of new volunteer fighters that join our organization, it is the most invaluable training that they can get before they actually step foot on a wildfire that is, you know, ripping across the landscape. And so one of the things that we have been working on is trying to, you know, get into these volunteer fire departments, you know, that are not utilizing prescribed fire, or their districts or areas are not involved in prescribed fire, and trying to get some of that training on the ground with them, and then also inviting them out to our PBA burns. And you'd be surprised on how many, especially the younger generation, these kids, if they're not, you know, at work or whatever, when we're doing our burns and they're on your email list, they'll show up and help just because they like fire. I mean, everybody likes fire after they've been on a few prescribed burns. So, you know, some of those members have turned into really great PBA leaders, even though they're not even landowners, which is pretty awesome.
No, I just wanted to add on to that, at least down in our 4-county mid-Missouri area. And I can't remember if I mentioned it in the presentation, but, you know, depending on which fire district we're in, whether it's Academy or Bone Steel or Gregory or wherever, you know, we obviously notify that fire department that we will be doing a burn there, and we do invite them out there. A lot of times we'd actually prefer they come out there, whether just to have a truck or two. But what we, as part of our burn plan, well, not really part of the burn plan, but if a volunteer fire department does provide some equipment or manpower for that landowner on that prescribed burn, we don't require it, but then we highly suggest to that landowner that they make a donation back to that volunteer fire department. So that's kind of an unwritten policy that we have with Mid-Missouri. In fact, you know, like I know Sheldon mentioned radios and stuff like that. So like all the radios that we use for Mid-Missouri when we're doing our prescribed burns are tied into the interagencies in the state. So if we do have VFDs that are present on that burn, we can communicate with them on the same channel. Works flawlessly. So good point. Yes, the volunteer fire department, especially if you're starting a new PBA, get your volunteer fire departments involved as best you can.
Awesome. Thank you. If anybody has any other questions that they would like to ask the group, we can have a microphone sent out to you. This is kind of the last opportunity for the day.
I'd like to ask a question. Oh, it's Pete again.
Sorry. I would like, if we want to, or does anybody have, I would like you all to actually just take this challenge, or maybe we can talk about it now. If we cannot train on a central site, and if we've got PBAs that need training, we know, like we had talked to the Southeast group at one point about bringing the training to them. Same with bringing the training to Lower Brule and the River Breaks. Mid-Missouri, the need isn't quite as much because they do a lot of training on their fires, but still there's somewhat of a classroom training need there. Plus, well, if we can't do this anymore, we need to have a game plan. We need a second option. The need for the live fire training is not going to go away. So I'm just curious if anybody's got any grand ideas. Do we try to move it onto private land? Do we identify maybe a different leader if in fact as state employees we can no longer meet that need? It saddens me to think that could be a reality, but really this fire community may need to advance without state help. It's possible that could be the outcome because it would trip too many other things. So anyway, I don't know if anybody's going to be bold enough to want to answer that today or put any ideas out there, but think about like where, when, and how we could continue as a fire community, private landowner on the ground training, because it's just the first step to success, and it can take on a lot of different forms. It doesn't necessarily have to look like what we've been doing, but anyway, that's my question.
Pete, I'll take a quick stab at that. Jeff Simprich again. Just my thoughts is that I, as a landowner, even though I've had the benefit of having training on the farm, I still feel that I could always learn more, right? So we've heard here today by numerous people, every burn is still a training burn. Not only for new folks there, but for folks that are seeing fire act a little different than what it had done the last time. So I would go on record as saying, yes, I think that we can have the game plan, and I think that that fire training can move back out on private land. And I'll say that right now, we would be welcome to come to our small farm again if it was the right thing for South Dakota and the area to do to continue that training on our private land.
I guess I just have a question back to Pete. Like, are those federal regulations lifted once you go back to private lands? Or how does that work?
Run, Jimmy, run.
Run, Jimmy. Bring me the mic, Jimmy. So that's a really great question. So it is a two-part thing. One part is fire on state land is being clearly interpreted. It seems to be anyway that will fall under whatever decision Department of Public Safety and Wildland Fire decide for the SDSU operated and owned land, whether it's on the experiment station or not, or under the school and public lands or not. Okay, so we hope to be able to negotiate a reasonable solution to that. But yes, that would trigger, so that is the land itself would require whatever regulations. Now, if we go off, there's still the reality that I'll use myself and Sean and Sandy, we are, and Jimmy, and even Kara's been trained up through that as an extension employee. We are still state employees. And the question will be, can that rule be relaxed? Or as state employees, are we required to meet those federal standards, and by way of association, the fires we participate in also have to meet those standards and have a qualified fire leader and a qualified plan and a qualified instructor and all those things. That's our reality right now. I don't know where it'll land, but that's kind of just that paints the picture. So we don't have the authority to relax the rules. We have to ensure that the people above us allow us to relax the rules. I think it's the safest way to say it. Anybody else want to pile on that at all? Go.
So yeah, I'm a private lands biologist up out of Mobridge for Game and Fish. And I actually had this situation. I actually help people plan their burns, and I can help out in like an official capacity to the day of the burn. But if I participate in an official capacity, I got told that everybody has to be red carded and certified in order to help out in that burn. So anytime that I help out, I go on my own, the day of the burn. So that's the limitation that we're facing on all this stuff right now.
Hey Pete, I got one follow-up on basically the fire training, moving from either state or federal lands. So maybe we could look at something similar to like the grazing exchange of pairing landowners that want prescribed fire to happen on their land up with the professionals throughout the state that need that training done. So I don't know what exactly that looks like, just a harebrained idea that popped in my head.
Thanks, Matt. I think we have to keep all of those ideas, on the table. We hit tripwires on a lot of very good ideas. But I think one of the things that I don't know that we should be willing to compromise our professional goals by saying, hey, we got to take a day off to go help our landowners burn. That bothers me in a lot of ways. I think that just feeds this broken system, to be honest with you. If I'm a fire professional and I'm a professional educator and I have to take a day off to go do my job, that just doesn't seem like it's a very sustainable system to me, But there's a lot of people that do it because they care about the resource and they care about landowners. So.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Brad Vosberg. I'm the president of the Coyote One Wildland Association, and some of us came here today to observe, and I by no means intended to get up and speak in front of you. And all of this is really new to me, and I think maybe a little bit to our organization. We are a wildland. We are an association of volunteer fire departments on the eastern side of the state, and we do some prescribed fire. We do assist with it. I really myself did not realize where Pete is at and what troubles they're looking to. So I really can't speak much, and I certainly don't want to speak for my association without us getting with them on it. But we're a volunteer fire department, so we are here to help those in our communities, and I think that we can work together. We do training. We've trained landowners. We have academies we hold. Training is our emphasis. We are NWCG based, but I think we can work together and come up with training programs that would be useful for the landowners. And I think we could come together just in concepts we're coming up with here today, so I got nothing concrete for you, but I'm willing to work with people and see if we can come up with some plans.
So I guess we're gonna have a conversation right here. So maybe that is the impetus for a loose council. This is the first time we've really done this, and maybe that is exactly why we need to come together, and again, to really have that our focus, and don't walk away. But I mean, we didn't bring these guys in. This forum was one day, and there's a lot of fire that's not present in the room, and maybe there is a solution there that we can come together again. I guess that's what I'm asking. Should we do that?
Absolutely. Like I said, yeah. Well, let's have a conversation with everybody, and which is good though. I mean, like I was telling Pete, we do trainings. I've developed grassland fire classes for the VFD aspect of it, but the class is no different, really. I mean, I've taught classes that are based on fighting the fire that's not supposed to be there, but it's still the same concept we use in prescribed fire, and we do prescribed fire. I heard it mentioned that the VFDs like to use these as training. That's absolutely, it's on our flyer. We do prescribed fire because it is an immense training tool to our young members that want to be able to go out west and fight forest fire, but they need that experience, which is what we get on eastern South Dakota with prescribed fire. Thanks. Anybody else got anything you want to ask about it or that I can maybe help?